a picture of all those baseball cards I have? I sent you a picture of a tub of half full of baseball cards. Got to be thousands and thousands of
Oh
them,
man,
and football cards too.
that's right up my alley, man.
Well, uh, check your email, and I will, and you'll see a picture of a tub of, uh, like I said, thousands of cards.
I started a show called Super Sports Collection Show. And it started with me and this young guy to talk about sports cards, sports memorabilia, and just to get, because I'm a teacher, and it was to get kids interested in getting off the computer and getting involved with collecting cards and negotiating and trading. And I've started at about 3 schools, and it's going really well. Kind of funny, it's kind of juvenile, but people are really picking up on it. And if I can get those kids off the computer and get them talking to each other and negotiating with each other. I started collecting cards when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I'm not going to say exactly what year, but my card collection started in the 60s. And I did it for a while. I've collected the Mad magazines, the Archie comics, the Supermans, the Batman comic books. And then, of course, when I went off to college, uh, forgot all about it. The good news is my mom did not throw my cards away. She didn't throw my magazines away, my comic books away. So, and now years later, I've gotten interested again. And I'm so thrilled because I have one of the most interesting ice hockey players of my generation who said he would do the show with me. Uh, I want to do a little bit of background, if you don't mind, Jeff. Today's guest was the very first Maryland native to play in the National Hockey League, but he grew up and learned to play hockey in Michigan. Now, he started his National Hockey League career with the Hartford Whalers in 1979. And he would also go on to play with the Montreal Canadiens, the Calgary Flames, Toronto Maple Leafs, Edmonton Oilers, the New York Rangers, and Detroit Red Wings. And he retired in 1989. Now, Jeff, you let me know in an email that you have a collection of your own. When did you start collecting cards?
I didn't. Though that collection was given to me by a friend who lost a relative who was an avid collector. So I have that in my possession, but I was never really I remember seeing cards, and I was interested in baseball cards when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. At that point, I'd really never even played much hockey. I considered myself a baseball player, and I dreamed about having my own baseball card one day.
I bet.
But I knew that I wanted to be a professional athlete even at the age of 8. But at that point, it would have been baseball. And then I remember one day kind of realizing basketball is not going to be my sport. We were in the middle school gym, and there were 7 of us playing basketball. And so it was the three better players challenged the 4 of us to a game, and they ran us ragged. And at that moment, I had this epiphany. You know what? You're not going to make the NBA. You better forget about basketball. Are you okay with that? And my 8-year-old brain told myself, yeah, I'm okay with that. Basketball's out. So it was still baseball, and I played a lot of football too, and I loved it. But my dad gave me some pretty good advice. Said, look, you're not going to be big enough to if you're going to play football, you're going to have to be a lineman, and you're not going to be big enough. Those pro linemen are 6'7", 6'8". You'll be 6'2". So you probably wouldn't make it as a pro football player. And I realized he's right. At that point, it was down to football. At that point, it was down to baseball and hockey. And in the ninth grade, I used to be one of the best baseball players in the city. But when I was in the ninth grade, the coach announces the starting lineup, and I'm not in it. And I said, "Coach, what's going on?" He said, "Brubaker, you haven't been practicing any baseball for years. You go to hockey camp all summer. You play the first 2 games of the season, you play the last 2 games of the season, and you haven't gotten any better in years." I said, "You know what? You're kind of right about that." And at that point, I knew that hockey was going to be my sport.
Wow. That's a great story. So, um, you played in 178 NHL games, but before that, in the late 70s, to get there, you played with what they call, minor league teams. And there was 2 years where you had a combined 560 penalty minutes for 2 minor league teams. Tell me about that guy and what was on his mind at the time.
Well, I hockey was a little crazy back then. In the 70s and 80s, hockey was the absolute Wild West. And there were fights every night, and intimidation was a tactic. And some teams loaded up on tough guys. And I realized that, again, when I was 19 years old, my coach Gary Green with the Peterborough Petes said, "Jeff, if you don't toughen up, you're not going to make it." And at that point, hockey was the only avenue to pro sports I had. So I said, "Well, I guess." I thought about that for 10 seconds and said, "Well, I guess I better toughen up." And intellectually, I knew that, I didn't mind fighting, and I was not bad at it. And I certainly I wasn't scared of what could happen to me in a hockey fight. I was maybe scared that some guy would embarrass me, but I was never, intellectually, I knew that as soon as somebody starts getting the better of another, the linesmen step in and they pull you apart, before you take too much of a beating. And I said, "Heck, this is not that tough of a way to make a living." I didn't mind it at all. So that kind of became, that I knew that was my ticket. If my whole career, when one team got tired of me and let me go, another team would always pick me up, and I'd fill that, fill a hole for them for a while. And so over the years, they wanted to get away from that kind of, there were guys in the league when I broke in that could do nothing but fight. And they gradually moved away from that. They made it a lot tougher for a guy with limited skills to stay in the league. They eliminated all the clutching and grabbing and all those little tricks that a guy like me could use to make himself valuable. Subsequently would just land you in the penalty box. So, I came from a certain era where fighting was kind of a legitimate tactic. And, teams would, try to intimidate other teams. And I didn't mind that if it would get me to the NHL and keep me in the NHL, then I was all for it. But I don't know if my game today would be welcome in the NHL.
It's one thing to be, on dry land and you're boxing and you're fighting on dry land. How the heck did you learn how to fight on ice? I've always wondered about that.
You know what, I think I had my first fight when I was in hockey when I was maybe 16. And you just, it's, you gotta grab on the guy and get, some kind of, you just learn that somehow. You learn it fight by fight, punch by punch. And there is no real recipe for, nobody's ever published a book on how to fight on ice skates. It's just something that you learn through practice. You get used to it, and and some guys end up being better at it than others.
Were you an angry guy?
You'd be surprised. A lot of times, I remember fighting. People were surprised that they'd see me fighting a guy like Dave Semenko, one of the tougher boys in the NHL. And then we'd be, after the game, they'd see us in the bar across the street from the hockey arena drinking beer together. You guys just tried to kill each other. We're off the clock now.
Wow. So it is a little bit like that. I mean, I've had a couple of the hockey guys tell me about that. I told you Brian Propp was good enough to come on the show, and one of the questions that I asked him, and I'd really like to ask you that. When you were on a team, was it important for you to be liked? I'm sure respected. Was it important for you to be liked, or were you just someone who wanted to do their job? Did you want your teammates to like you, or was that not important?
Well, it doesn't matter what kind of a team you're on, whether it's a hockey team or an office team. Of course, you want to be liked and respected. I never really thought about that. I can tell you this: in the 11 years that I did play, I can only name 2 or 3 guys who I didn't like, who I thought, who were, who I would call, a schmuck. Most guys are, if you're not a good guy, if you're not a guy that can get along with teammates and work in a team environment, then you're pretty much weeded out before you get to the NHL. Somewhere along the line, some coach will cut you and say, look, this guy's a cancerous distraction for our team. And so, part of getting to the big leagues is proving that you have the ability and you have, something of value for the team. But another part of it is just not eliminating yourself, before you even get there.
You mentioned you got traded, or you were released, and of course you picked up on 7 or 8 teams. I always wondered what it was like to leave one team who you put all your time and energy into, and then had to just say goodbye to those guys and start on a brand new team. What was that like?
At the time, it's always an adventure when you join a team. I was thrilled to go from Hartford to Montreal. What a really good culture change that was. The Hartford Whalers, when I played for them, were just an absolute country club with no direction, no clue, no management. It's just one of the worst organizations I've ever, encountered. And I went straight to one of the best organizations. And the thing I regret is starting my career in Hartford, where they had no work. I mean, my 3 years with that organization did not prepare me, for success. And boy, did I learn some lessons when I got to Montreal, what kind of shape those guys were in and what kind of, what kind of work ethic that they had. From there, so every time you change teams, it's pretty much the same. Most of the guys, they'll welcome you to the team, and it's part of the business. The players come and go every day, and but the game doesn't change. Let's say when you join a company and then go from one company to another, you're probably not going from the company you leave and the company you join are probably not that similar. You have to learn new policies, new procedures, everything. When you go from one professional sports team to another, they're all the structure is all the same. The rules of hockey don't change. If you're traded from Montreal to Toronto, the rules of the game don't change. The strategies of the game don't change. So it's not really a tough transition. And the guys that you leave and the guys that you join all came from all the same places anyway. So the culture is similar on a lot of teams, at least with the guys in the way guys relate to each other, their rituals, their routines, and things like that. Some teams are better coached and driven harder than others. Some organizations expect more of their players, but it's not a huge culture shock when you go from one to another.
Tell me about the couple more teams. You said there were some other teams that you respected. Montreal. It's so good to hear about that.
I was traded from Toronto to Edmonton, and at that time, Toronto was dead last, and Edmonton was in first place, and they'd won 2 Stanley Cups, and it was but they had so much talent that those guys, they were just, they could, those guys could party all night and go out and win hockey games. It was a lot of fun. They were like a roving band of pirates, that Edmonton team. I've never seen anything like it. Of course, they had Wayne Gretzky, they had Mark Messier, and they had, a dozen other, Yari Curry, a dozen other star players like that. So, they were just a swashbuckling group of mavericks. And they were good, and they knew it, and it was a fun environment. Toronto was not a fun environment, being, on a losing team. I mean, it was fun to play the game, and it was fun to travel around the continent and, play in all the, major league venues, but it wasn't fun, reading, how the press in Toronto would crucify you after every loss, etc. So I had a wide variety of experiences.
What about the Rangers? Because I'm former New Yorker, and tell me about your memories about that.
That was another team that had a lot of talent, but couldn't really, just didn't know how to win. I don't want to say too much about, anybody there, but I mean, if I had a beef with the Rangers, certainly wasn't with any of the players I was with, because we had a lot of real good players. But that's a team that I guess the coaching staff couldn't figure out how to maximize the talent that Phil Esposito had put on the ice for him.
I went to Northeastern University in Boston, and when I was going to school there was a guy named Chris Nyland. Some people called him Knuckles Nyland.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure that you played around the same time with him. Uh,
I
tell
was, I was when I went from Hartford to Montreal, Chris was there. And I played with him for a while. And the next training camp, I kind of realized, well, it's either him or me, which was a common thing in training camp. You know, aspiring tough guys would go after the resident tough guy. I fought Chris 5 times one day in training camp. uh, yeah, we 4 times right in a row. We, I challenged him. We fought. We actually fought. Uh, they pulled us apart, and we went right back at it. And they pulled us apart, and we went back at it again until we were both too tired to even stand up. Then I fought him one more time in training in the afternoon scrimmage, and I thought I had handled him pretty well in the early 4 fights. In the 5th fight, he nailed me a good one, and he was a tough customer. He'd
Yeah.
fight anybody.
Yep.
He wasn't really. He was more of a mauler than a puncher. He wasn't big and he didn't have long arms, so he couldn't stand back and throw them with tough guys. But he'd get in there and try to wrestle with a guy and land if he could land an uppercut or something, and that was kind of how he'd do his damage.
So were there players that you keep in touch with now that you're buddies with now that you stayed connected?
A few, not that many, believe it or not. Hockey it's kind of strange where there are no goodbyes. It's always kind of like, I'll see you when I see you. And you never know when your career is going to end. And, you play with a guy for a while and you become close, then you're traded or he's traded and he's got to go do his job. You got to go do your job. And then, I can think of, several guys that I was, really good friends with and still am, but we don't live in the same city anymore. So we see each other now and then at reunions or whatever. But again, there are no goodbyes. It's just, hey, see you next time. So, and that's a thing that's actually, now that you mention it, it's a problem with guys that a lot of guys struggle when they leave the game because they had outstanding camaraderie. And then those guys that you don't make when you're 35 or 45 or 55, you don't make guys don't make a lot of, new friends.
Right.
You make friends with the guys that you came out on the street with.
Right.
The guys you went to school with, the guys you went to the military with, the guys that you met, early in your hard running days. And that's a problem I have. A lot of my best friends or good friends, the guys that I've been closest with in my life, they live all over North America now. I don't see them that often. And then a lot of guys, have actually passed away. But if I'd love it if I had a few more guy friends. But for a guy like me, if I was to see some other guy and say, hey, man, why don't you and let's be buddies and we can hang out together and kind of talk about our feelings and stuff. That guy would go, yeah, okay, sure. So that's actually, when you come to think about it, it's a problem for guys that get out of sports. And they made friends all over the continent, but now they're out of it and they miss those guys. And it's too late to make similar friendships.
Another question that I always think about, a guy like you played on teams, Montreal, I mean, Edmonton, those places were sold out. You know, you're looking at 20,000 people in a small area yelling and screaming. And most of the time it's for you, and sometimes it was, you know, at you, but there was a lot of energy in those hockey arenas. And then you hear that silence, you retire. Tell me about that.
Well, I was lucky in that I got my last year, I was 31, and I had been signed by the Detroit Red Wings pretty much as just a depth player, somebody that they could call up if they needed. And my coach was Bill Dineen, who was also my very first coach with New England in the WHA. And Detroit had a ton of talent in the minors. And all of a sudden, I'm not even playing regularly in the American League. And that's when Bill gave me a break and kind of turned me into his assistant coach. And then he developed a severe hernia and he could barely walk, could barely travel. I drove him to all the games where he'd be laying in the back seat, very uncomfortable, and he couldn't skate. So I'm running all the practices and basically coaching the team in the playoffs. And we won the American Hockey League championship, which gave me a credential. That got me hired as a head coach and general manager in the East Coast Hockey League, which was a new league that played at what would be equivalent to the AA baseball leagues. And we won the championship in my first year there. Wow. So that kind of set me up. I had an 11 or 12-year coaching career as well. So all that really did was prolong my adolescence. But when that ride was finally over, then I had to reinvent myself, which was tough. I had to do it by myself. I didn't have really a network of support or anything. And that basically formed the, that gave me the idea of, the company that I have founded and now run, Players Capital Group, where we, everybody in the group is an ex-pro athlete from the NFL, the NHL, or NASCAR, any of the major league sports. We have a lot of connectivity and we use that. Our connectivity is actually very valuable capital to the richest investors in the world, who imagine yourself being a private equity baron on the 60th floor somewhere in Manhattan, and you're running an industrial oriented fund and trying to buy say a factory in Detroit, Michigan. Now, the guy who owns that company, he doesn't know who you are. You're just a nameless, faceless suit to him. You're just another guy trying to get his attention out of thousands. However, if that first call comes from somebody who played for the Detroit Tigers or the Detroit Lions or the Detroit Red Wings, he's going to answer that call.
Absolutely.
And that's the beginning of a relationship, which can then be monetized by, bringing value. And the value that we can bring is that, is in the role of business development. Like I said, people take our calls, which is a tough thing for a lot of other guys with big checkbooks to do.
So tell me more. Tell me more about the company so that people watching this, they can, know what to do and why they should contact you.
People have been trying to unite the world of ex-pro athletes for years. It's never worked because the athletes themselves never brought any real value to the table. Business is about the creation and delivery of value. And there's not a lot of value in an autograph session or a podcast or, uh, you know, an appearance, a public appearance or something like that. Now, the question is, as an ex-pro athlete, what value do you have? Well, not much. You know, you're a guy like me on by all, you know, by myself. Hey, I got some fun stories, interesting stories, but you know, nothing that people will pay to hear about. However, uh, so individually, we don't have a value proposition, but collectively, we have a massive value proposition. We have assets that nobody else has, and they are. Uh, we have we have a great geographical footprint. There are retired pro athletes in every city in North America, and they have, you know, they're accomplished guys with some charisma and some presence. Uh, our footprint nearly mirrors the Fortune 1000. We're everywhere they are. We have a certain cachet. People pay to watch pro athletes work. They don't pay to watch bankers work or attorneys work or accountants work. So that, you know, we have a network, and we are connected to billions of dollars of investment capital, and people will return our calls all over the continent. That is a valuable commodity. Okay. And we're putting that to work.
How did you get the idea to do something like that? I mean, it's a great idea,
I
great concept.
when when I when I got out of hockey in my late 40s, I struggled. I didn't have a, you know, I hadn't, professional sports does not prepare you for the business world. You know, you don't have to work 8, 10 hours a day. You don't have to stretch your brain thinking about arcane concepts. You know, it's a pretty easy ride, to tell the truth, especially, you know, if you don't, you know, if you can, you know, you have to work hard in the gym, you have to work hard at conditioning, but that's easy for guys to do. You know, what's not easy is, you know, figuring out business models, you know, assessing cash flow, uh, you know, things that you know, pro sports is not great training for your business brain. So I struggled for a while, but you know, I'd always had I fell into I answered an ad from a guy in Philadelphia who was a business broker trying to extend his reach, and I thought I was going to get good training and good support, and I got no training, no support. So I started doing things on my own, and I realized that when I stopped and realized and examined the competition, I realized that I had created a much more efficient and uh, aggressive system, because nobody that was in the business had ever taught me the business. So, you know, but basically helping people buy and sell companies was what I was doing. And then I had some epiphanies, and I started out doing smaller deals, and then I learned how to kind of 10x the size of the deals I was doing. And then at that point, there was a spate of suicides where a lot of pro hockey players and some fairly famous football players had, you know, they committed suicide because they couldn't deal with life after the game. I said, you know what? if I can do what I'm doing, so can my ex-hockey playing buddies do this. And so could, by extension, so could NFL and other former athletes from other, from other sports. And I realized that, one of the biggest problems was just that lack of camaraderie with other alpha dudes. And so I just realized, I started simplifying my thinking and asking myself, to whom do we have value? Okay. Business is all about creating value. How can we create value? What assets do we have? And I realized actually we've got some pretty big assets, but only if we combine our collective networks. But when we do that collectively, we have a great value proposition. And I've been working, and that's kind of what's driven me. We will become a very powerful group at some point, because we'll have people everywhere that can help you solve problems.
So, in trying to understand this a little bit more, because I think it's excellent and fascinating. On one side, and tell me if I'm wrong, you have people that either want to or don't even realize that professional athletes can help them. And on the other side, you're looking for professional athletes to join your organization. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, absolutely. The premise is simple. The richest investors in the world do not have a very efficient system for spreading news of their demand, what they're looking for. I've realized that even the biggest investment groups in the world leave business development to the lowest men on the totem pole in their organization. The newest people are in charge of business development. And those companies have billions and billions of dollars to invest. Okay. I get letters all the time. Hey, Jeff, what do you got? Do you guys have anything we can invest in? We're looking to invest in healthcare, or we're looking to invest in energy, or we're looking to invest, in business services. We want companies with up to $50 million in revenue, et cetera. That actual role is usually filled by young kids just out of business school, and sending emails and stuff. It's just not a very efficient system. However, we can get people's attention quickly and make those introductions, and so there's real value, in what we do. Again, marketing and business development is where we have value, and we're exploiting that for the benefit of our members. When you join us, you are automatically connected to, believe it or not, at least $1 trillion worth of investment capital. It's not our capital, but that capital is managed by companies that can use our business development ability. So from there, we're developing several other business models, but the main idea is we're building a team in every major league market, and every one of those teams is networked in real time. See, you can't become a dominant factor in any industry until you go to the time and trouble of becoming your own software company. Business runs on software now. And so we've invested the time and energy, to have the electronic infrastructure to be able to, do what we're contemplating now. So at this point, we're now rolling out, we're recruiting new members. We have proven business models where we can deliver unique value to the guys that are managing, big investment funds.
Very impressive. Very impressive, Jeff. I'm so glad that you accepted my invitation to be on the show. I had no idea. I knew I had an idea about what you did before business. I had no idea about what you're doing, because one of the soft spots for me has always been what happens to these athletes after they're done. I mean, you said that the suicide is an obvious problem, but so many of them turn to so many different things because they cannot handle at all life after sports. And I am thrilled.
Yeah, I was a somebody, now I'm a nobody.
Right,
And the fact is, you're not a nobody.
right.
You're a member of you're still a member of an exclusive club. And now we've wrapped business models, lucrative business models, around that concept. So if anybody wants to learn more, our website is playerscapitalgroup.com, and click on the careers tab at the top of the page. And that will give you a very concise explanation of our value proposition to the business world.
So I've certainly gotten to know a lot of professional athletes. I have a huge list of people that have already been on this show. I'd like to talk to you after the show about how we might be able to help each other. You just never know.
Well, I'd be glad to do that, as a matter of fact. So when we conclude this interview for the public, maybe stick around and let's talk about a few other things.
Absolutely. And
And I'll just leave it to, for your audience, if any of them happen to have played pro sports, we'd love to talk to you about the next phase of your life. Again, it's playerscapitalgroup.com /careers.
well, I've got people to talk to about what you're doing. To me, it's everything that was important to me as someone associated with sports my whole life, but never really in competition. But I always had a heart. I've had some great people on this show: Leonard Marshall, Gary Reasons from the New York Giants. I've had on Tony the Tiger Lopez, a world champion boxer. I mean, JoJo Townsell from the Jets. Wes Chamberlain played baseball, and I told you about Brian Prop. A lot of different people that who's been kind enough to do this show with me. So the other thing is, hey, I still have a heart for kids and getting sports cards to kids. So after the show, we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff Brubaker.
My pleasure.
For being on the show.
Thank you, Bruce.
And this was just wonderful. So God bless. And folks, thanks for being here with us, and we'll catch you again later. Thanks so much.